And by the end of practice, I literally had nothing left. Like, I couldn't jog back to the huddle. There was nothing left in me. I knew who I was as a football player. I had no idea who I was as a professional. I know that I'm Polynesian. That's already in me. I don't have to prove anything. Like, I don't have to prove anything on this call or on any other call so that you know that I'm Polynesian. I am Polynesian. We're a group of explorers. We set sail and we find new islands, we find new things, and then we adopt them. And they become part of our culture because we add value to them and they add value to us.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Nation News. Our mission is to connect and inspire our Islander community by sharing Islander success stories with everyone. So stay tuned for the full episode. Today we got Westlee Tonga on the show. He's a Polynesian. We sort of went through the traditional route of college football, but that's how I ended up in the business world, in sales. Westlee, thanks for coming on the show, and really excited to get talking with you.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Dean. Excited to be here. So looking forward to our chat. I didn't grow up around many other Polynesians. Like in my high school, I think there was like one other family. I'm LDS, so like we had one other family or two other families in my ward. So I didn't grow up around a ton of it. I started in Dallas and then we moved down to Houston. And so there's obviously a lot in Dallas. My sisters, would go out to Euless and stuff, but I was from Allen at the time. So as far as the community is concerned, I didn't see a lot of it. And so I was left to kind of decide on my own, in the periphery on, what it meant to be Polynesian. And I don't think I would got it right, but here I am. I think I've kind of figured out some of it. Yeah, so playing football was not my first love. It just happened to be what I ended up being good at. I was a basketball player. I liked playing basketball, but up until my like sophomore year, I was kind of just a little fat kid. So that did not lend itself well to my strengths at the time. But so when I was in seventh grade, I actually quit football. I would call my mom. And there were 7 periods of class over the course of the day. I'd call her during 6 periods. 7th period was football. And I would make these like throw up noises in the bathroom so that when the nurse would let me go home. And I'd call my mom and she'd come and pick me up before practice. That happened for like 2 weeks straight. And then I quit football in 7th grade because it was too hard. And then we moved down to Houston. I started playing football again. And then fortunately, like I developed a little bit more. I got better. I learned how to, certain skills. And so starting as like when I got to really my sophomore year, I moved into freshman, my freshman onto the varsity team my freshman year. And then as a sophomore, that's when I really saw like, oh, okay, this is going to be my ticket. And so I kept playing football. I went to camps in the summer. I ended up going to BYU and Utah and a couple other ones down in Houston, but it was not like it is today where you could just throw up a highlight film and have, not that I had any highlights for one, but you couldn't guess, like there's not so many diamonds in the rough today that you can find just because everything is pretty well publicized. But I got to Utah after my mission, and the rest is history, as they say. I loved my time in Utah. My freshman year, I tore my MCL like 3 games in or something like that, and I was kind of just starting to expand my role a little bit. And then as a senior, actually, I tore the other knee. I tore my ACL, MCL in that knee. And that was set to be a really good year for me, kind of a springboard. But that set me back quite a bit. I ended up coming back the next year and playing and not getting hurt. But it was never really quite the same after that. So I don't know that I necessarily bounced back all the way, but from a production standpoint, that last year was my most productive. So you really just kind of take it as it comes. No one expects to get hurt on any particular play, but you do know that it kind of comes with the territory, and so you deal with it as it comes.
What would you tell someone who's kind of going through that right now? Maybe it's in sports or it's in some other aspect of their life where they get hit by life.
Yeah. One thing I believe helps, and I know that helped me, is knowing like the different facets of your identity, what they mean. For me, I'm religious, and so I actually was talking to a friend of mine on his podcast fairly recently about, cultivating different identities and knowing which ones are most important. My identity as a father, as a son, as a son of God, um, those are more important to me than was my role as a tight end at Utah. And so I knew that if this one crumbled, I still have all of these other ones. I still have all of these other things that I can do. I think the damage happens most when you put all of your eggs in one basket and it's the wrong basket. Because I'll never stop being a son of God. I'll never stop being a son, or a father, no matter whatever happens to me. So those to me are lifelong and eternal roles. But everyone that plays football knows that at some point this will end. And for all but the smallest, tiniest, most minuscule percentage of the population, everyone will finish. Football will quit on you before you quit on football. And so I think when you understand the dynamics there and know which roles are most important, it gets a little bit easier to like to suffer the consequences of the things that you can't control.
I think it's really powerful because, especially for a lot of athletes, I mean, included, my career ended in high school, but there's come this point where your identity as an athlete ends, and then you go into whatever career you end up going into.
Mm-hmm.
So, how was that transition for you coming out of college?
Oh, it was rough. It was real rough. I feel like I worked so hard at my craft in football. I got a shot at a couple different places. I went to the Chiefs. I went to the Raiders. I didn't really stick anywhere. And so I actually hung it up pretty quickly. I was a little bit older at the time, but transitioning back into the world of business was difficult because I knew who I was as a football player. I had no idea who I was as a professional. And I think one of the problems with the way that we develop athletes currently is we don't teach them which skills are transferable. Like you learn leadership, you learn team building, you learn how to problem solve, how to take coaching and take criticism and apply it. Like um, those are all very marketable skills, but you don't know how to do that until you're actually in it. And so I've actually been trying to help with, Utah and with BYU and some of the other colleges, helping their athletes transition and helping them transition earlier so that they have a network when they leave that they can lean on. Because learning who you are after sports is all done can be a really difficult transition for guys. A lot of guys, honestly, they slip into depression. I had gone on a mission. I feel like I was married. I was a little bit more mature, I think, than probably the average person when they finished playing sports as a collegiate athlete. And so I don't know that I had as rough of a time, like from the outside looking in. It felt sucky though. Like you don't know who you are anymore. And so you're kind of beholden to the opportunities that present themselves at the time. And so I didn't know my value to the market. I didn't really even know what I was good at because you're around a bunch of other people that like here's one thing that I think is interesting for athletes. When you leave athletics and you go and sit down at your first job, it's very unlikely that the person sitting next to you has very much experience in waking up at 5 a.m., going to get some hard coaching, get yelled at in a high intensity environment, and then get to class to try to pass chemistry by 8 a.m., right? Those are all very marketable skills, and being able to know, like, no, I work hard. I do what I say. I know how to show up on time. All of those things are occur in the world of sports. And so there's some advantages, but a lot of people, when they get back into, the real world, so to say, in business, they kind of fall down to the level of the competition from time to time, rather than using some of the lessons that got them to where they were as athletes. So I don't know. I would say my transition was difficult, but ideally, I think it's turned into a successful go thus far.
That's awesome. Is there a moment you can think back to in your professional career where your football days really helped you get through it, or
Oh,
something you learned from football?
yeah, all the time, honestly. My sophomore year, any of my old teammates will tell you, like we had an offensive coordinator, who shall remain nameless, but he like you're familiar with football, so like you go by periods, right? You go 5 minute periods over the course of the practice. Usually, there's somewhere around 18 in most places. It can be as low as like 12 on a light day, as high as like 20, 24 maybe on a heavy day. During spring ball, we went 28 periods and then he would turn off the clock. So the practices were crazy long. I was playing, if you know about the positions, there's like from a tight end positions, there's an F, which is like a slot, and then a Y, which is kind of the true hand in the ground tight end. And at the time, we had some injuries. And so I was playing one F and two Y. So I was running with both teams. And by the end of practice, I literally had nothing left. Like I couldn't jog back to the huddle. There was nothing left in me. And so I think back to that time, honestly, and think like you know, you're always surprised with how much further you can go from the point that you thought you had nothing left. And so for those times, like I look back at that and think like, yeah, it could be worse. Like, you know, like that was kind of the low point for me. And so there's a ton of those types of lessons that I feel like I learned where you know, and really one of the more important ones is kind of in that same vein where when we would run sprints, I would feel like, oh, this sucks. Like I'm dying. This is horrible. And then you would look to the side and be like, but I'm not dying as much as you are, so I guess I guess I'm okay. And so I tried to, you know, I've applied that here in the business world, and it's really helped me a lot. That I feel like if everybody is suffering around me, I will find a way to suffer less. And by the time that I am breaking, you have been broken for a long time. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. You never know what anybody else is going through. You have to take it with a lot of humility, but that's the mentality that I take with it is that, you know, just try to outlast a lot of times.
Wow, that's really cool. But then, even how did you?
So I had a friend that was at a company called Nuvi. A lot of people make the transition pretty easily from athletics, specifically football, into sales because it's like a true meritocracy. You eat what you kill. If you work hard, you make more. Like so, it's a pretty 1-to-1 ratio or 1-to-1 translation of how to have success in athletics and then how to have success in sales. And so that's where I started. I did that for just a couple months, especially while I was training. I had some work on the side, and then I actually got into a logistics company. So I was there for about 3 years. It was a company that actually worked with my mom's district. She was in transportation inside in the school district where she lived, and there was a vendor that she got me an interview with. I ended up getting on with them, moving to Texas for about 3 years, Virginia pretty briefly. But I saw fairly quickly that this wasn't what I wanted to do long term. And so we ended up making the move back to Utah after that. But that's kind of the first three-ish years of my, you know, professional career.
How do you think those skills as a football player, like you mentioned, being a leader or being a mentor, and then also bringing in your culture background as a Polynesian, how did that all come together as you even went beyond that?
Yeah. So getting into my professional life, all of those things have worked in my favor. And so as an athlete, like you know, there's a lot of just random things that are helpful, like the fact that I'm tall. Like it's easy to come in and not, you know, hide in a room and be able to speak and to be given the space to do some of those things. It's nice to have the network of people who are at least familiar with who you are, have a rough approximation because they know that they like college sports and they would probably get along with you and like they're not starting from square one when you walk into the room. And then the other thing, and the same thing applies with being Polynesian, where the things that we do well, that we're known for, are often attractive to people. Being friendly, being congenial, and being easy to talk to, being funny, or having a sense of humor, having a sense of humility, where people know that Polynesians don't often just come and knock down your door and tell you how good they are at everything. Like there's a sense of humility there, and all of the things that people kind of hear about Polynesians. They're things that people like to be around and attach themselves to. And so, if you can throw in the right mix of all of those traits, and then learn some of the hard skills, or learn some of the skills that are most valuable in the professional sense, then I feel like you can get like an accelerated path to what you want, or to professional success, so long as you let the good things be good things and acquire all the other skills that you need to along the way to provide real and actual value, and monetary value to an organization.
Awesome. And then you went through this whole business route, like working all the jobs, and then eventually you decided to go back to school. What were you thinking through that
So
decision?
I I I got back into tech when we moved back to Utah. And so in getting into tech, you gain this pretty vast network quickly if you want to. There's a ton of different what's it they're like networking organizations within Utah. There's Utah Polynesian Professionals, there's Raise the Tide, there's the Pacific Islander Chamber of Commerce, Pacific Island Chamber of Commerce. There's like all of the different um, like avenues that you can go through to find people that need your skills, right? And so I started doing a lot of that. I went through tech. I started as an SDR, so like an entry level sales rep. I worked my way up to a leader in an organization. Then I went and became a closer in another organization. And the typical path within sales, especially, is that you kind of work your way up from an individual contributor up into a head of sales role or whatever. And then a lot of times those guys will kind of jump from company to company until they get equity at somewhere that pops, and then that will make them a significant amount of money. The way that things have shaken out in the last 2-ish years with the economy, those moves don't happen the same that they used to. And so as I saw that, and as I saw some of my friends, or I had connections with founders of new tech companies, I started meeting some of these people and understanding that some of the things that I had almost accidentally gained some expertise in sales are very marketable, and they're very valuable to startups, especially because, for example, like when I was at that logistics company, part of my job was to go to different parts of the country and essentially start the company from the ground up. And so you would go and meet with the leaders, confirm all the contracts. You would go and recruit all of these drivers, and just I learned what it was like to be in a startup where it's usually an all hands on deck sort of scenario, and you're just trying to add value wherever you can, regardless of your title or your quote unquote job description. And so when I got back into tech, I applied that same mentality, and it was really beneficial because I saw all of these things that were either unowned or places where you could add value without having to be promoted. And so I would grab onto those, and it helped me kind of accelerate through the promotional paths at different companies. And it didn't hurt to be at the right companies at the right time. But as far as like using all of those skills and building all of that network, the reason I went back to school was because in seeing all of this whole picture, I also saw at the time that I didn't really want to be a founder, but in order to make the real money that I wanted to make, frankly, you have to have ownership. Like you need to own a piece of something. And so the play for getting to I'm in an MBA program right now at BYU. I'm in their executive program. And one, I wanted to tap into the network. And then two, I wanted to just be more financially literate from a balance sheet perspective. And it's really given me that. And in addition to that, it's actually given me a lot of things that I did not expect, where um, like we've learned a lot about leadership, and I did not expect to learn as much about leadership. I've been over organizations, I've led teams, and so some of the stuff that we started learning at the beginning I thought was a little bit ticky tack, but it turns out like I just wasn't as good of a leader as I thought I was. So um,
Like, what were some of the things being a leader?
um, so one, like, trying to think of anything specific, but there are certain things that, and I still believe that at a certain point, certain principles of leadership break down in turmoil, right? There's an interesting book that I read recently. It's called A First Rate Madness. And it talks about how in times of like peace, a mentally stable leader is sufficient. They'll be able to see everything they need to see, make all of the moves that they need to make. But that in times of war or in times of turmoil and strife, that actually a leader that's more acquainted with instability, like with deep depression or with different sorts of, what we believe to be psychological ailments, that in times of turmoil, those leaders can actually outperform ones who are more mentally stable because they see through all of the muck into clarity. Whereas the people who are more mentally typical, they see the muck. They see all of the darkness for darkness. Whereas someone that's more acquainted with that darkness can be at a more level head in those times and see through that darkness to the light. And so I've applied that principle, like, for example, that a good leader, like a good, we'll say a good religious leader, right? It's going to be pretty difficult for them to walk into a wide receiver room at a successful college campus and lead that group because they're notoriously egotistic. And some of that is by design because you have to have a me first mentality when you're going up to get a ball, when you're going to try to beat someone across from you. You can't really be super collaborative as you're trying to beat up the person that's in front of you, And so some of those things I equate to the instability of, war or strife and things like that. And so there are certain leadership principles that I feel like they have to change a little bit. But what I realized is that a lot of those leadership principles, they're still the same. They just also require something else. And so like you think of, Jocko Willink is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So in his book, he talks a lot about that type of stuff. And he talks a lot about being collaborative with his group and with all of the people in his squad. And that was interesting to me to learn about because you think at such a high level of performance and excellence that it has to be extremely hierarchical, where it's like this person decides this and they do this and there's one job for one person and everything like that. And while there is definitely specialties, the way he describes leadership at the top echelons of military service is it's very collaborative and you listen. And there's a lot of the same principles that it takes to just be a father or to just be a leader of any organization. The difference is the qualifications that it takes to be on the team. It's not the difference in the actual leadership ecosystem. It's the difference in the fact that they've screened out 99% of applicants into that program. And now when they get there and you have your core team, now you apply all those same very basic, very simple leadership principles of being a good listener, being someone who is humble and able to follow the lead of someone who is more skilled in a certain subject. Like you don't bring in good people and tell them what to do. You bring in good people and help them tell you what to do on a lot of those cases. So I don't know if that's where you were going with it, but regarding the specific leadership piece, that's what I found, and it's been really interesting. But with the whole program in general, my end goal now, it's changed a little bit, is at some point, I'll I'll look to be an owner, and either branch off and do my own thing, or join someone else, with an equity piece somewhere.
Do you think there's something that you've learned in the real world of actually doing the thing, of doing sales and working your career that they don't teach in your MBA program?
Yeah, there's tons. There really is a lot. Um, and some of it I think is because of the time constraints. Like there's just only so much that you can fit in such a short amount of time. And one of the things that I've been fortunate to see is that like I said, I'm in the executive program, so it's like the weekend program, but it's filled with a bunch of people that are also in their professional careers. They're in the thick of it, right? And so they're solving a lot of the problems that we're discussing in case studies. That this is how they did it at Qualtrics. This is how they did it at, Angel Studios. This is how they do it at this other place. And so none of it is necessarily hypothetical, which I think is great. From my perspective, some of the things that are specific to my experience have a lot to do with diversity. Because in Utah is not known for its diversity, for sure. And so you get into these scenarios where, either at work or in school, I am playing the voice of all minorities, right? Which is not necessarily something that is like that I'm capable of doing, like I only represent me. I can speak a little bit to the Polynesian community because I am in that community, but I am one voice in that community. And so I don't speak for everyone that looks like me even. And so because there's so much culture in our culture and in general, like there's a lot of cultures that I don't belong to, and that are not always represented. That's one thing that I think that they're actively trying to improve and that needs to continue to improve.
This gets into a super interesting thing, and you mentioned it earlier. What does it mean to be Polynesian to you?
Who, you know, the answer to this has evolved and will continue to, I imagine. One of the things that I like to think about is that if you see Moana, obviously, we're a group of explorers where we set sail and we find new islands, we find new things, and then we adopt them, and they become part of our culture because we add value to them and they add value to us. All of the things that we learn and we grow and we figure out, they become part of us and part of our culture. And I feel like my dad, he did a lot to instill that in me, that he made no, he had no qualms with, whoa, 1 second. Sorry, something happened on my screen, but he had no qualms with telling me like whatever is beneficial to you in the culture, whatever is good for you in the culture, that's your culture. You adopt that, you keep that. And whatever is not, you're not required to adopt that. It's not, you don't have to do that just because you're Tongan, right? Which was very freeing for me. It was pretty, honestly, it was pretty confusing for me as a kid because I didn't know what that meant. But now, having gone through my life, I have the opportunity to be like, what does it mean to be Polynesian in business? And to me, it means something different than it means to other people. But I know that I'm Polynesian. I know that that's already in me. I don't have to prove anything. Like I don't have to prove anything on this call or on any other call so that you know that I'm Polynesian. I am Polynesian. And I tried to do a lot to help the other people in my life, especially the youth, to discover that and understand that what other people tell you it means to be Polynesian is not necessarily correct. And it took me a while to understand that because I would come out to Utah. My sisters live in Utah, and I would be around other Polynesians, and I would kind of get a little glimpse into what it meant. And it wasn't until I was like I was in college where I started to realize the things that these other kids were telling me were like Polynesian traits. They grew up here in Utah. Like, you don't know the same things that I don't know. And you may have grown up around some other Polynesians, but we both have the same proximity back to the islands. And so what it means to be Polynesian, I think, is a very fluid concept. Um, I think it's a very rich history, and there's a lot to kind of choose from. But I don't really feel bad about saying that I will adopt anything in our culture that is beneficial and is good and encourages people to stand taller and do better and be more community and more village driven. I also don't feel bad at all about leaving anything behind that I don't feel like is good for me and my family. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my philosophy
Yeah,
on
no,
it.
I really want to dive into that more actually,
Mhm.
because this is something that I think is really, really important, especially for our community. Because the same goes for me too. I mean, there's parts of the Tongan culture that, like, I completely agree with. I would obviously embrace that, and then there's other parts that I, kind of like you, Wesley, I wouldn't really lean into those. What I think are some of those things that you embrace, and then some of the other things that you choose not to adopt.
So these are there's some fine lines and some double-edged swords, right? That they kind of walk the boundaries, right? On just a razor thin edge. I'll give you an example. For example, um, like people talk about, that person would give you the shirt off their back, right? I've seen that happen. Like that's not you've probably seen the same thing happen where it's like, I will give
Exactly.
you anything that I have. And I think that's a great trait to have. I think you also need to be wise, and it's honestly something I'm still figuring out in knowing what you're doing for people and what you're doing to people. A lot of times in that regard, like for example, um, we've all heard stories of people, taking out a second mortgage to throw their kid a first birthday party, right? Traditionally a large gathering with lots of stuff and important things, um, but it's frivolous. It can be frivolous. There's a component there where sometimes that is not something that should be occurring. We need to be more financially responsible as an entire people, and there's a ton of different pockets and honestly tons of resources now to help us to do that. And I'm still learning that myself. But that is one thing that needs to continue to evolve. It's difficult to resolve both of those thoughts where you want to continue. I love the giving portion of the culture where I will give you anything that I have. Nothing, like, these are just material goods, and we want to show that we love. Um, but at the same time, not hurting those around you and hurting your family in order to prove your love to someone else. So I think there's a fine line in being giving and having hubris there, where like you've probably seen the same videos that I've seen on social media where they're just like poking fun at that, like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have much to give, all we have is this $10,000 that we can offer you. Like, okay, yeah, just go sit down. But yeah, there's a couple different things, and I may be misspeaking again. Like I tend to do that. I know enough about my culture to respect the things that I know about, and also enough to respect the things that I don't always know about, and I don't know all the history behind certain practices and certain traditions, and so I can still reverence those while not adopting them.
No, I mean, even when you were talking about it, I can think of so many examples where it's exactly what you say. It is double-edged sword. There was this video that I saw. I think your sister posted this on Facebook or something,
Mhm.
where you went to like Silicon. Can you sort of tell that story than what you were mentioning, if you remember
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you're talking about?
So yeah, I remember it vividly. I was with a few other guys that are, movers and shakers in the community. I hope they wouldn't mind me sharing their name. Maybe I'll ask them next time. But Hailame Kinikini, he's doing some excellent stuff in short-term rentals.
Llama is
and
really cool.
yeah, he's a big dog in that space, and he's got a lot of expertise. There's Derek Tumonga, who's doing some of the same. He's also in tech with me. We actually work at the same company. He's done a ton of stuff in sales and in business in general. He's pretty well diversified at this point. He's just kind of a general mover and shaker. And then Doug Fiafia, who just put in for political office. He's running for House of Representatives, I believe.
Oh, really cool.
So these are guys that are doing some major stuff. Like I told them at the time, like I was very grateful to be at the table with them. Not the least of which because I didn't have to pay, which was nice.
Nothing hits like Frank Lowe.
Nothing. But their minds are, collectively just all kind of pointed in the same direction to help our people as a group to accelerate and to have things that we haven't had before. And some of the things I think we are all kind of conscious of is trying to keep all of the things that we do have already in perspective, because this sense of community, this sense of, it takes a village is important to all of us. And so, Doug and all of those guys are, founders, from what I understand, of Raise the Tide, which is a major organization that does some really cool stuff. They bring in great talent. They provide a lot of resources to the community, and they're a great platform for our people in general, especially out here in Utah. And so to me, as I was discussing that meeting, my sister is also deeply involved in kind of the grassroots portion of that, where she's not in the private sector. She works for, a 501c3. She works for a Polynesian 501c3 called PICTAR. It's Pacific Islander Knowledge to Action Resources. And they do a ton on a national scale to give resources and provide resources to the community. And so it was interesting to see the two dynamics at play, that one group was very highly focused on, at the time on tech and, discussing different business procedures and how we're going to optimize this and that and what the next thing is. And then immediately going from there into a discussion where my sister has gotten a grant, and part of that grant is aimed at education. And so she brought in experts to come and train her and a group of other people on what these specific designs mean specific to Polynesia. What does your tat mean? What does that mean? Like a lot of people can't tell you, but learning all of the different components of the design and what the symbolism is from the islands, how it's translated here, how the ebb and the flow of all of those things, going from there, or from the business meeting into that, was so refreshing, because to me now those are equally Polynesian to me, because we have pockets of people that are aimed at doing great things in the world and in business. We also have pockets of people that are aimed at preservation and retelling of those stories. And so it's cool to see and to feel like we have a little bit of a tie back to the islands, because I know that they kept those things in with them as they traveled, as they set sail looking for new islands, as they did all of those things to help us to branch out, to expand, to find new places, to find new fields and new islands, while also preserving some of those traditions that they had and applying them in new ways at new places. And so that was a little bit of the discussion that we had regarding those two meetings, just because they happened to happen on the same night.
Oh, if you could put up a sign on every single Polynesian or Pacific Islander home, and this sign goes up, millions and millions of people see this every single day. They're walking in, walking out of their home. What would you put on that sign, and why?
What would I put on that sign? I know it's not gonna sound like super interesting or sexy, I think, but probably just welcome. I think as a people, we're very welcoming people. As we continue to move and to change and adapt to the cultures where we find ourselves here in America, in New Zealand, and anywhere that we're at. I think the faster we go, the farther we go, the easier it is to begin to isolate and to begin to decide what's no longer what you're no longer part of. But I think and I would hope that the concept of being welcoming, of being inviting, will continue to be part of that culture. And so, while it's not sexy, I think the I think one of the best things that you can be in business is simple. And I think that's a simple way to go about things. It's just being welcoming.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story and coming on the show. If someone wants to connect or reach out to support what you're doing, how can they do that, Wesley?
I think do it on LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn is pretty easy. I'm on there fairly frequently. I also have social media. I haven't been super active. I'm trying to be more active, but frankly, I do not enjoy it. And so we'll see if I can grow that a little bit, but we'll see. LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. It's just my name, Westlee Tonga.
Right on. Cool, man. Thanks for coming on the show. Really happy to talk to you today.
Yeah, you too, man. Dean, I love what you're doing, bro. So keep on going.
Hey, you made it. Thanks for listening to this Islander success story. If you want more of these, head over to Nesian.news. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you an email every single time we put an Islander success story out there. And remember, our mission is to connect and inspire Islanders around the world.